Imagine the scene at number 10 Downing Street. The tea is cold, the atmosphere is colder, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has just realized that in the game of political musical chairs, the music has stopped, and Keir Starmer has personally pulled her seat out from under her. We are talking about a full-blown civil war in the heart of the British government, and the casualty list starts with the woman who holds the purse strings. It is not just a disagreement over a spreadsheet, it is a cold-blooded execution of a political career. Sir Keir, the man who prides himself on being the sensible adult in the room, has apparently decided that the best way to save his own skin after a series of monumental blunders is to offer up his chancellor's head on a silver platter. Quick favor, if you are loving this breakdown of the chaos unfolding across the pond, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet, and honestly, it is the only way to stay updated on how these geopolitical tremors affect us here in the Canadian hub. It is free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Thanks if you did. Now, back to the absolute demolition of the Downing Street decorum. The scapegoat strategy. Toss her overboard. The British establishment thrives on a very specific type of etiquette, a game where I pretend to answer and you pretend to be satisfied. But that illusion is shattered. The British political establishment is currently staring down the barrel of a devastating election defeat this coming May. We are looking at potential wipeouts in the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, not to mention a bloodbath in local elections across England. And in the world of high-stakes politics, when the ship is sinking, the captain usually looks for someone to toss overboard to lighten the load. According to insiders, Starmer has lost every ounce of patience he once had for Reeves. He is pinning the tail on the donkey for every unpopular decision made since they took office. From the callous slashing of pensioners' winter fuel payments to the planned cuts to disability benefits that have left the Labour backbenchers in a state of absolute revolt. One Labour member of Parliament put it quite bluntly, someone's head is going to have to roll, and Keir is determined it won't be his. It is the ultimate, it is not me, it is you breakup, except instead of a messy flat, they are fighting over the fate of the United Kingdom's economy. But why now? Why is the man who supposedly worked in lockstep with his chancellor suddenly sharpening the axe? The answer lies in the trail of political wreckage left behind by Reeves' tenure. We've had the winter fuel payment fiasco, a move so unpopular it made Scrooge look like a philanthropist. We've had the proposed cuts to disability benefits that were eventually abandoned under mass pressure, making the government look both cruel and incompetent simultaneously. And let's not forget the business rates for pubs and hospitality firms. The industry called it a monumental avoidable cock-up, and they weren't being hyperbolic. By ending COVID-era reliefs while simultaneously reducing headline rates, Reeves inadvertently slapped pubs with a 76% increase in their tax bills. It was a kick in the nuts delivered with all the grace of a sledgehammer. Starmer, seeing his approval ratings plummet to record lows of minus 57%, matching the historic nadir of Rishi Sunak, and flirting with Liz Truss levels of public loathing, has decided that the only way to fix the foundations is to replace the person who designed them. The Beijing snub. Spitting feathers in forbidden cities now. If you think that sounds brutal, wait until you hear about the China trip snub that sent Rachel Reeves into a literal tailspin. While Sir Keir is currently jetting off to Beijing for a high-profile 3-day summit in late January 2026, the Chancellor was initially left out of the headline optics before the Treasury scrambled to justify her presence as a separate itinerary. Sources say she has been spitting feathers, which is a very British way of saying she is absolutely livid. She is pacing the halls of the Treasury while Starmer rubs shoulders with top British business leaders and Chinese officials, attempting to look like a world leader while his own government burns at home. It is a snub so public and so deliberate that even the most optimistic Labour supporters are starting to see the writing on the wall. The Prime Minister isn't just distancing himself from his Chancellor, he is actively erasing her from the narrative. Treasury sources are, of course, denying the reports, but the silence from number 11 is deafening. Think about the optics. Usually, when a Prime Minister goes to China to improve economic ties, they bring the person in charge of the economy as the star of the show. It is like going to a fancy steakhouse and leaving your wallet at home. Except in this case, the wallet has feelings and is currently leaking to the press about how much of a theater kid the Prime Minister is. Starmer claims it is his duty to improve relations with the country he calls a defining force in global governance. But the real defining force right now is the sheer awkwardness of a government that can't even share a private jet without someone getting their feelings hurt. The Gordon and Denton panic. 404 error. MP not found, but the plot thickens even further as we look at the upcoming Gorton and Denton by-election. This is where the panic truly sets in. Starmer has ordered all 404 Labour members of Parliament to make campaigning visits to this single constituency in a desperate bid to avoid a humiliating defeat on February 26th. Why the panic? Because the bookmakers have the Reform candidate Matt Goodwin as a serious contender to flip a seat that should be a Labour fortress. It has been Labour for over 90 years. But the fortress walls are crumbling because the leadership blocked the popular Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham from standing. They were so afraid of Burnham's popularity overshadowing Starmer, potentially acting as a springboard for a leadership challenge, that they essentially handed the keys of the city to the opposition. It is the political equivalent of benching your star player in the finals because you are worried he might get more cheers than the coach. The King of the North was told he couldn't run because the party didn't want the expense of a mayoral by-election. If you believe that, I have a bridge in London to sell you. The truth is, Starmer is terrified. He looked his colleagues in the eye during a National Executive Committee meeting where the vote was a staggering 8-1 against Burnham and argued that keeping the mayor away was about resource management. In reality, it was about survival. But blocking Burnham has backfired spectacularly. It has created a vacuum of charisma that Reform UK is more than happy to fill. The rise of Matt Goodwin, a referendum on Keir End. Let us be clear about Matt Goodwin. He isn't just a candidate, he is a lightning rod for the fed-up vote. A GB News presenter and former academic, Goodwin has framed this by-election as a referendum on Keir Starmer. While Starmer tries to label Reform's politics as toxic division, the reality on the ground in Gorton and Denton is that voters feel abandoned by a Labour Party that seems more interested in internal purges than in the price of a pint or a heating bill. In a seat where 25% of the population identifies as Muslim and 44% is from an ethnic minority background, the Greens are also sensing blood, positioning themselves as the anti-reform alternative while Labour's vote collapses. The fact that the deputy leader, Lucy Powell, was the only one on the NEC to support Burnham's bid tells you everything you need to know about the one-team narrative Starmer is trying to push. It is a house divided, and as we know, those usually have a habit of falling down. The Green Party has launched a major push, with sources saying the Labour vote has collapsed on the doorsteps. Starmer is sending in 400 MPs to knock on doors, but they might find that nobody is home. Or worse, they are home and they have a very long list of complaints. The circular firing squad. Who's really to blame? The irony here is thicker than a London fog. While Starmer tries to blame Reeves for the lack of direction, his own MPs are starting to point the finger back at him. They see a prime minister who is reactive rather than proactive, a leader who blocks his most talented people out of insecurity, and a man who is willing to sacrifice his closest allies to survive one more news cycle. The sensible Labour government is looking more like a circular firing squad with every passing hour. If Reeves goes, she won't go quietly. She has been described as a human shield for Starmer's own incompetence, and once that shield is removed, the Prime Minister is standing in the middle of a battlefield with no cover. He might find that signing her resignation was the easy part. Surviving the fallout of her exit will be the real test. One Labour MP recently said that the government has gone from drowning to treading water in choppy seas. But let's be honest, they aren't even treading water anymore. They are currently being circled by sharks, and Starmer thinks that if he throws enough of his friends to the predators, he might make it back to shore. But the shore is miles away, and he's run out of friends. Even the unions are turning. The head of Unison, a major Labour funder, called the decision to block Burnham blatant gerrymandering. When your bank stops liking you, you're in real trouble. The Canadian connection. A warning to the North as we watch this unfold from the Canadian hub. The parallels are striking, and frankly, a bit terrifying. We are essentially watching a high-stakes rehearsal of our own potential future. We see the same patterns of leadership, insulation, and the desperate search for a fall guy when policies fail to meet the messy reality of the kitchen table. We share the same parliamentary DNA, the same penchant for bureaucratic red tape, and that distinct, painful frustration with leaders who seem more interested in optics than outcomes. The drama in Westminster isn't just a British soap opera for us to snack on. It is a cautionary tale of what happens when a government loses its soul in the pursuit of fiscal rules that nobody asked for and everyone suffers from. In Canada, we have our own versions of this sensible adult routine. We see leaders who are excellent at the photo op but struggle immensely with the reality op. The Starmer method of blaming the person next to you, the loyal lieutenant who has been taking the bullets for months, is a global trend, but it has a short shelf life. Eventually, the room gets very quiet because you have run out of people to throw under the bus. The Gorton and Denton result in Manchester will be the first real test of whether the public is buying the "it's all the Chancellor's fault" narrative, or if they are ready to hold the man at the top accountable for the signature on the policy. Let's be honest, the Canadian political landscape is often just Westminster with better winter tires and more maple syrup, but the underlying rod is the same. When a leader becomes so insulated by a tiny circle of advisors that they can't hear the roar of disapproval from the actual public, They start making decisions that look like political suicide. Starmer's move to block Andy Burnham is a classic example of this center knows best arrogance. It is exactly the kind of move that alienates the very regions you need to win. In Canada, we call this ignoring the West or forgetting the Maritimes. In London, it is called Starmerism. Whatever you name it, it smells like an ivory tower on fire. The Canadian connection here is about the erosion of trust. When Rachel Reeves stands at the dispatch box and delivers a budget that feels like a betrayal to the very people who voted for change, she isn't just failing at economics, she is failing at the basic contract of representative democracy. Canadians know this feeling all too well. The sense that the person in charge of the money is more concerned with the approval of a few bond traders in a glass tower than the person trying to figure out if they can afford to heat their home this February. If Keir Starmer thinks he can solve this by simply swapping Rachel for a different face, he is fundamentally miscalculating the depth of the public's anger. It is not about the face, it is about the bill. The Great Unraveling, a 3000 word deep dive. To truly understand why Rachel Reeves is currently contemplating throwing a stapler at the portraits in the Treasury, we have to look at the sheer scale of the fiscal failure. It is not just one budget, it is a philosophy of pain now for more pain later. Imagine you are a small business owner in Manchester. You have survived the pandemic, you have survived the energy crisis, and then the sensible government arrives and tells you that your reward for staying afloat is a tax bill that looks like a phone number. The 76% increase in business rates for pubs is not a rounding error. It is a death sentence for the British High Street. In the November 2025 budget, Reeves announced a discount that saved businesses just 5p for every £1 paid, barely enough to buy a packet of crisps, let alone save a pub. By April 2026, the support is set to vanish completely unless the government executes another desperate U-turn. In fact, on January 27, 2026, Reeves was forced into a humiliating partial climb down, offering a 15% discount for pubs only, while leaving restaurants and cafes to twist in the wind. UK Hospitality had warned that 30,000 venues could close. This is the legacy Starmer wants to distance himself from. He wants to walk into the May elections and say, oh, that was Rachel's idea. I was busy being prime ministerial in Beijing. But the public is not that thick. They remember who stood next to her at the dispatch box, nodding along like a dashboard ornament. They remember the growth, growth, growth slogans that have resulted in tax, tax, tax. And let's talk about those pensioners. Slashing the winter fuel payment was a decision that struck at the very heart of the labor base. It was a cold, calculated move that backfired because it lacked a basic human element. It was technocracy at its worst, the kind of decision made by people who have never had to choose between a warm meal and a warm room. When you treat people like entries on a spreadsheet, they tend to stop voting for you and start looking for anyone with a pulse and a different plan. Starmer's decision to move his economic advisors into number 10 is the ultimate vote of no confidence. He is effectively setting up a shadow treasury, staffed by people who answer only to him. It is a creeping marginalization that has turned Rachel Reeves into a ghost in her own department. She is the chancellor in name only, while the prime minister's chief secretary, Darren Jones, is increasingly seen as the real power behind the velvet curtain. This isn't just efficient governance, it is a hostile takeover of the most important department in the land. And then there is the international stage. Starmer's trip to China in January 2026 was supposed to be his statesman moment. He wanted to show that Britain was back on the world stage building sophisticated and pragmatic relationships. But by sidelining the chancellor during the planning and initial execution, leaving her to find out the details of the economic dialogue from the press, he turned a diplomatic mission into a domestic melodrama. He is rubbing shoulders with Chinese officials while his own MPs are signing letters of protest back home. About 50 Labour MPs have already signed a letter objecting to the Burnham snub. The cracks aren't just showing, the whole wall is coming down, and Starmer is trying to hold it up with a few glossy press releases from Beijing. The irony of Matt Goodwin being the favorite and Gordon and Denton cannot be overstated. Here is a man who built a career on calling the Westminster elite out of touch and self-serving, and Keir Starmer has given him the perfect campaign slogan, on a silver platter. Labour is so afraid of a local hero like Andy Burnham that they'd rather let a reform candidate win. It writes itself. Goodwin doesn't even have to be a good candidate. He just has to be not Starmer. He is the living embodiment of the protest vote, and in a seat like Gorton and Denton, that is a very dangerous thing for an incumbent government. In a seat where 44% of people come from ethnic minority backgrounds, Goodwin's past comments about UK-born people not necessarily being British should, in any sane political world, make him unelectable. But we aren't living in a sane political world. We are living in a world of pure, unadulterated fury. Many voters are willing to look past a candidate's baggage if it means giving the government a bloody nose they won't forget. The Green Party is also benefiting from this anyone but Labor sentiment, framing the by-election as a straight fight between them and reform. Labor, the party that owns the seat and has for nearly a century, is being treated like a third-party distraction. It is a staggering fall from grace. As we conclude this deep dive into the absolute shambles of the British government, it is worth asking, what is left for Rachel Reeves? If she stays, she is a lame duck, a ghost haunting the Treasury, waiting for the inevitable reshuffle that will strip her of her title as well as her power. If she goes, she's the fall girl for a prime minister who refuses to take responsibility for the very policies he demanded. It is a choice between a dignified exit and a slow, painful political death by 1,000 leaks. Starmer thinks he can hit the reset button by changing a few faces, but the problem isn't the faces, it is the operating system. You can change the chancellor every week if you want, but if the prime minister is still the one signing the orders and blocking the talent, the results will be exactly the same. The May 2000-2006 elections will be the final verdict. If Labour is wiped out in Scotland and Wales, if they lose the local councils that were their bedrock, Starmer will have no more shields left to throw. He will be standing alone at the top of a very tall and very shaky ladder, looking down at a public that is no longer listening. And as we know in politics, the higher you climb, the harder you fall, especially when you have spent the whole way up trying to kick everyone else off. Rachel Reeves might be the first casualty of this civil war, but she certainly won't be the last. Good day to you all, and thank you for watching. Would you like me to look into how a reform victory in Gorton and Denton could spark a leadership challenge against Starmer? Just let me know.